Historical background: the Battle of the Trench, also known as the Battle of Al-Khandaq or Battle of the Confederates, Ghazwa-e-Al-Ahzab, took place in 5 627 CE in Medina. It was a defining confrontation between the Muslims of Medina, led by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and a coalition of Arab and Jewish tribes from across the Arabian Peninsula. Following the earlier battles of Badr 624 CE and Uhud 625 CE, tensions between the Muslims and the Quraysh of Mecca had reached their peak. The Quraysh sought a final, decisive blow to eliminate Islam entirely. The Battle of the Trench was the largest and most strategically complex conflict of the Prophet's life up to that point. The cause of the battle. After their partial victory at the Battle of Uhud, the Quraysh realized that the Muslims were growing stronger both politically and militarily. The Banu Nadir, a Jewish tribe expelled from Medina for breaking their pact with the Muslims, moved to Khaybar and began plotting revenge. Their leaders, particularly Huyay ibn Akhtab, traveled to Mecca to persuade the Quraysh to form a grand alliance against the Muslims. Their diplomacy succeeded. The Quraysh, the tribes of Ghatafan, Banu Asad, Banu Sulaym, and others joined the coalition. Altogether, they gathered an army estimated at 10,000 men, an unprecedented force in Arabian warfare at the time. The Muslims, by contrast, could only muster around 3,000 defenders. Medina was in grave danger. The strategy of the trench. When news of the advancing Confederate army reached Medina, the Prophet Muhammad PBUH called a council of war with his companions. Among them was Salman al-Farisi, the Persian, who suggested a defensive tactic unfamiliar to the Arabs, digging a trench Khandaq around the exposed northern part of Medina. The rest of the city was protected naturally by volcanic rock formations and palm groves, making the trench an effective barrier. The Prophet approved this plan immediately. The Muslims divided the work into sections, with the Prophet himself laboring alongside them, carrying dirt and striking the ground. Despite the cold winds and hunger, the Muslims worked tirelessly for about 2 weeks, digging a trench approximately 5 meters wide and 3 meters deep, wide enough to stop cavalry and difficult for infantry to cross under fire. During this period, the Muslims were tested with hardship and hunger, as described in the Quran Surah Al-Ahzab 33-11. When they came at you from above you and from below you, and when eyes grew wild and hearts reached the throats, and you thought thoughts about Allah. There the believers were tested and shaken with a mighty shaking. To the beginning of the siege, the Confederate army arrived outside Medina and was stunned to find a trench blocking their path, a tactic they had never encountered. Their cavalry, led by Khalid ibn al-Walid, tried repeatedly to cross but failed. The trench effectively neutralized the enemy's numerical advantage. For nearly 3 weeks, the Confederate army laid siege to Medina. They launched archery attacks and attempted crossings at various points, but the Muslims defended the trench with determination. One of the fiercest moments occurred when a group of Qurayshi cavalry, including the famed warrior Amr ibn Abd Wad, found a narrow spot to leap across. Amr, known as a fearsome fighter, challenged the Muslims to single combat. The Prophet, PBUH, allowed Ali ibn Abi Talib's Rave to face him. After a fierce duel, Ali killed Amr, lifting Muslim morale while demoralizing the enemy. Internal treachery. The Banu Qurayza during the siege. The situation became more perilous when the Jewish tribe of Banu Qurayza, who lived inside Medina, broke their peace treaty with the Muslims. Encouraged by Huyay ibn Akhtab, they plotted to attack the Muslims from within. This act of treachery placed Medina in extreme danger. Muslims were now threatened from both the outside and the inside. However, the Prophet took swift action, sending Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, Sa'd ibn Ubadah, and others to confirm the reports. Once verified, he fortified the Muslim families and supplies within strongholds to prevent internal attack. Despite their betrayal, Allah protected the believers. The Banu Qurayza did not succeed in coordinating an internal assault, partly due to fear and confusion within the Confederate ranks. As the siege drags on, as the siege continued, the Confederate army began to suffer from cold weather, shortage of food, and low morale. The Muslim defenders, though hungry and exhausted, remained steadfast in their faith. The Prophet, PBU, constantly encouraged his followers, reminding them that patience and faith would bring Allah's victory. At one point, the Prophet is reported to have struck a rock while digging and prophesied the future conquests of Persia, Rome, and Yemen, a statement that inspired hope in the hearts of the believers. Divine intervention. After nearly a month of siege, Allah's help came in a miraculous way. A powerful windstorm Sabas struck the Confederate camp at night. Their tents were torn apart, fires extinguished, and fear spread among them. The Quran describes this moment, and Allah sent upon them a wind and forces you did not see, and Allah is ever seeing of what you do. Says Surah Al-Ahzab 33:9. The Confederates' unity collapsed. Abu Sufyan, the Quraysh leader, ordered a retreat, declaring that the campaign had failed. The tribes disbanded and returned to their homes, leaving the Muslims victorious without a full-scale battle. Aftermath: the judgment of Banu Qurayza. After the Confederate forces withdrew, the Prophet turned his attention to Banu Qurayza, whose betrayal had endangered the entire community. The Muslims besieged their fortress for around 25 days until they surrendered. The Prophet allowed Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, leader of the Aus tribe who had prior alliances with the Qurayza, to judge their fate. Sa'd ruled according to the law of the Torah, that the men who committed treason be executed, and the women and children spared. The Prophet accepted this judgment, saying, "You have judged by the judgment of Allah." Though harsh, the punishment was consistent with the grave nature of their betrayal in a time of war. 2. Significance and lessons. The Battle of the Trench marked a decisive turning point in Islamic history. For the first time, the Quraysh and their allies had failed completely to defeat the Muslims. Their prestige among the Arabs declined sharply, while the Muslims' reputation grew. It also demonstrated the Prophet Muhammad's strategic brilliance, adopting an unfamiliar defensive tactic, maintaining unity under pressure, and relying on both practical measures and faith. Spiritually, the battle tested the believers' patience and trust in Allah. It separated the true believers from the hypocrites who doubted God's promise. As the Quran states 33:2 as when the believers saw the Confederates, they said, "This is what Allah and His Messenger had promised us." And Allah and His Messenger spoke the truth, and it only increased them in faith and submission. Conclusion: the Battle of the Trench was not merely a military confrontation, but a profound test of faith, unity, and endurance. It showcased how strategy, courage, and trust in divine support can triumph even against overwhelming odds. After this battle, the Quraysh never again attempted to invade Medina. The balance of power in Arabia had shifted decisively. Within 3 years, the Muslims would march peacefully into Mecca, fulfilling the promise that began with the struggle and perseverance shown at the trench.